The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March of 1882, and Felicity Carson knew before she even broke the wax seal that her entire life had been built on lies. She stood in the parlor of her modest home on the outskirts of Pueblo, Colorado, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the cream-colored paper. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across the wooden floor, but Felicity felt nothing except the cold dread settling in her stomach. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words were clear enough. Her fiancé, Theodore Whitmore, the man she'd been engaged to for 3 years, the man who traveled frequently for business and promised her a grand wedding upon his return, was already married, had been married for 7 years, had 3 children. And the woman who wrote this letter, a Mrs. Margaret Whitmore of St. Louis, was writing to warn her before she made the terrible mistake of believing another word that came from Theodore's mouth. Felicity sank onto the velvet settee, the letter falling from her hands to rest on her lap. She should have known. All those delayed wedding dates, all those excuses about business deals that required just one more trip, one more month, one more season. He had been so charming when he first arrived in Pueblo 2 years ago, sweeping into town with his tailored suits and easy smile, courting her with flowers and poetry and promises of a life beyond the dusty streets of this Colorado town. Her parents had died the previous winter, leaving her alone with a small house and a tiny inheritance, and Theodore had seemed like Providence itself, a gentleman who saw value in her when she felt most invisible. But he had seen something else entirely. A woman alone, vulnerable, easy to deceive. The tears came then, hot and bitter, streaming down her cheeks as she pressed her hands to her face. 3 years, 3 years of waiting, of planning, of dreaming about a future that had never existed. 3 years of defending him to her friends when they questioned why the wedding kept getting postponed. 3 years of believing every lie that fell from his lips like honey. She did not know how long she sat there, but eventually the tears stopped, replaced by something harder and sharper, anger, not just at Theodore, but at herself for being so foolish, so trusting, so desperate to believe in something beautiful that she had ignored every warning sign. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Felicity wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stood, smoothing her skirts. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror above the mantel and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her auburn hair, usually pinned neatly, had come loose in places. Her green eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. At 24 years old, she looked older, worn down by disappointment. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Felicity walked to the door and opened it to find her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, standing on the porch with a basket of fresh bread. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, her smile fading as she took in Felicity's appearance. "Oh my, what has happened?" Felicity tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she stepped aside and let Mrs. Henderson enter. The older woman set down her basket and immediately wrapped Felicity in her arms. "Tell me everything," she said softly. And Felicity did. She told her about the letter, about Theodore's deception, about the years she had wasted waiting for a man who had never intended to marry her. Mrs. Henderson listened without interruption, her face growing sterner with each revelation. "That scoundrel!" Mrs. Henderson finally said, her voice sharp with indignation. "That absolute scoundrel! And to think we all believed his gentleman act." "I'm such a fool," Felicity whispered. "You are not a fool, child. You are a woman who trusted someone who did not deserve your trust. There is a difference." Mrs. Henderson squeezed her hand. "What will you do?" Felicity had not thought that far ahead, but as she considered the question, she felt that sharp anger return. "I will confront him. He's supposed to return next week. I will make sure he knows that I know the truth." Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. "Good. Do not let him think he can slip away without consequence. Men like that, they rely on women staying quiet, staying ashamed. You have nothing to be ashamed of." After Mrs. Henderson left, Felicity spent the rest of the day in a strange fog, moving through the motions of her daily routine while her mind spun with everything she wanted to say to Theodore. But as the week progressed, something unexpected happened. Theodore's weekly telegram, which usually arrived like clockwork, never came. Neither did he appear on the expected train. Days turned into a week, then 2, and Felicity realized with a sinking feeling that he was not coming back at all. Somehow, perhaps through his wife, He had learned that his deception had been exposed, and he had simply disappeared from her life as easily as he had entered it. The realization brought a new wave of grief, not because she missed him, but because she would never get the confrontation she had prepared for, never get to tell him exactly what she thought of his lies. He had taken even that from her. It was on a warm afternoon in mid-April, nearly a month after receiving the letter, that Felicity decided she needed to leave her house. She had been hiding, she realized, staying within the safety of her four walls as though Theodore's deception was somehow her shame to bear. But Mrs. Henderson had been right. She had nothing to be ashamed of. She dressed carefully, pinning her hair properly and choosing a simple green dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Then she walked into town, holding her head high despite the whispers she knew would follow. Word had spread, as it always did in small towns, and she could feel eyes on her as she walked down Main Street. The general store was busy, filled with ranchers and their wives stocking up on supplies. Felicity gathered what she needed, trying to ignore the pitying glances from women she had known for years. She was at the counter, paying for her purchases, when a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Through the window, she could see a group of men on horseback riding into town. They were dusty from travel, their clothes worn but well-maintained. Cowboys, by the look of them, probably from one of the larger ranches outside of town. But it was the man in the lead who caught Felicity's attention. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders relaxed but alert. His hat was pulled low, shading his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, darkened with several days of stubble. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that seemed entirely different from Theodore's showy charm. "That is Dalton Jennings," the store clerk said, following her gaze. "Foreman at the Triple R Ranch, about 10 miles north. Good man, fair and honest, which is more than you can say for most." Felicity felt something twist in her chest at the word honest. It seemed like such a simple thing, honesty, and yet it had been entirely absent from her life for 3 years. She watched as Dalton Jennings dismounted, his movements fluid and economical. He said something to the other men, and they all laughed, the sound carrying through the open door of the store. Then he turned, and for just a moment, his eyes met hers through the window. They were blue, she noticed, very blue, like the Colorado sky on a clear day. And there was something in his gaze, a directness that made her breath catch. He nodded slightly, a simple acknowledgement of her presence, before turning away to tie his horse to the hitching post. "Will there be anything else, Miss Carson?" the clerk asked, and Felicity realized she had been staring. "No, thank you," she said quickly, gathering her packages. She needed to leave before she made a fool of herself again. Clearly, her judgment regarding men could not be trusted. She was halfway out the door when she collided with someone coming in. Strong hands caught her arm, steadying her, and she looked up to find herself face to face with Dalton Jennings. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice deep and warm. "Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine," Felicity managed, acutely aware of his hands still on her arms. His hands were large, calloused from hard work, and somehow the simple touch felt more real than any of Theodore's carefully practiced caresses. He released her immediately, stepping back to give her space. "I should have been watching where I was going." "No, it was my fault," Felicity said. "I was not paying attention." For a moment they simply stood there, and Felicity found herself studying his face. He was handsome, she realized, but not in the polished way Theodore had been. His features were weathered by sun and wind, his nose slightly crooked as though it had been broken once, his skin tanned dark from working outdoors. There were lines around his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into the distance and from smiling. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30, and there was something solid about him, something dependable. "I am Dalton Jennings," he said, offering his hand. "I do not believe we have met." "Felicity Carson," she replied, taking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and he shook her hand once before releasing it. "Miss Carson," he repeated, and she saw recognition flicker in his eyes. Of course. He had heard about her, about Theodore's deception. The whole town had heard. She braced herself for the pity, for the careful sympathy that would make her feel even more pathetic. But when he spoke again, his voice held none of that. "I hope you are settling in well in Pueblo. It is a good town, despite what you might have encountered." The words were carefully chosen, she realized. He was acknowledging what had happened without dwelling on it, without making her feel like a victim. It was, she thought, remarkably tactful for a cowboy. "Thank you," she said. "I have lived here for several years, actually. It is a good town." He nodded, his blue eyes still on her face. "Well, I'd better let you pass. It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Carson. And you, Mr. Jennings." He tipped his hat and stepped aside, and Felicity walked past him and out into the afternoon sunlight. She could feel his gaze on her back as she walked away, and despite everything, despite all the pain and betrayal of the past month, she found herself smiling slightly. The next few weeks passed quietly. Felicity tried to rebuild her life, to find purpose beyond the dreams that had been shattered. She took in sewing work, mending clothes for the families in town, and she volunteered at the small church, helping with the Sunday services and the community meals. It kept her busy, kept her mind occupied, but there were still moments, usually late at night, when the loneliness crept in, and she wondered if she would ever be able to trust anyone again. She saw Dalton Jennings several times over those weeks. He came into town regularly, always on ranch business, and he always seemed to appear when she was there. She would catch glimpses of him at the feed store, or outside the bank, or riding past her house on his way back to the ranch, and every time he saw her, he would tip his hat and offer a friendly greeting, nothing more. But somehow those simple interactions began to mean something to her. He never asked about Theodore. He never offered unwanted advice or sympathy. He simply treated her with respect, like a person worthy of basic human dignity, and after months of being treated like a fool, it was exactly what she needed. It was in early May, when the weather had turned warm and the wildflowers were blooming across the prairie, that Felicity decided to visit the ranch where her friend Sarah worked as a cook. Sarah had been inviting her for weeks, promising fresh air and good company, and Felicity finally felt ready to venture beyond the confines of Pueblo. She borrowed Mrs. Henderson's horse and buggy and made the journey north, following the well-worn road that cut through the grasslands. The Triple R Ranch sprawled across the landscape, its white fences and red barn visible from a mile away. As she drew closer, she could see cattle grazing in the distance and several cowboys working near the corrals. Sarah met her at the main house, a sprawling two-story building with a wide porch. "I'm so glad you came," Sarah said, embracing her warmly. "Come inside. I will make us some coffee and we can catch up properly." They spent the afternoon in the kitchen, talking and laughing while Sarah prepared the evening meal for the ranch hands. It felt good to be around someone who knew her story but did not define her by it. Sarah was practical and funny, with a sharp wit that kept Felicity entertained. "You know who works here, do not you?" Sarah asked casually as she rolled out dough for biscuits. "Who?" Felicity asked, though she had a suspicion she knew. "Dalton Jennings. He is the foreman. Best one this ranch has ever had, according to Mr. Richardson. Honest, hard-working, good with the men, and handsome too if you like that rugged type." Sarah glanced at her with a knowing smile. Felicity felt her cheeks warm. "I have met him briefly in town. He is a good man," Sarah said seriously. "Not like that snake who hurt you. Dalton is the real thing. What you see is what you get." Before Felicity could respond, the door opened and several ranch hands filed in for their supper. They were loud and cheerful, calling greetings to Sarah and nodding politely to Felicity. And then Dalton walked in, and the room seemed to shift somehow, his presence filling the space. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering across his face before settling into a warm smile. "Miss Carson, this is an unexpected pleasure." "Mr. Jennings," she replied, suddenly very aware of how she looked, flour on her hands from helping Sarah with the biscuits. "Felicity is visiting for the day," Sarah explained. "I've been trying to get her out here for weeks." "Well, I'm glad she finally came," Dalton said, his eyes still on Felicity. "Will you be joining us for supper?" "Oh, I could not impose," Felicity started to say, but Sarah cut her off. "Nonsense, we have plenty, and you are not riding back to Pueblo on an empty stomach. You will stay." And so, Felicity found herself seated at the long table in the ranch dining room, surrounded by cowboys and ranch hands, with Dalton Jennings sitting directly across from her. The meal was simple but delicious, roast beef and potatoes and Sarah's fresh biscuits, and the conversation flowed easily around the table. Dalton was quiet, she noticed, but when he spoke, the other men listened. There was a respect there, built not on fear but on genuine admiration. He asked questions, remembered details about the men's lives, offered advice when requested, and several times she caught him watching her with those steady blue eyes, a slight smile on his lips. After the meal, as the sun began to set, Dalton walked her out to the buggy. The evening air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. "Thank you for the company at supper," he said as he checked the harness on the horse, making sure everything was secure for her journey home. "Thank you for welcoming me," Felicity replied. "It was nice to see where Sarah works." He finished with the harness and turned to face her, leaning against the buggy. In the golden light of sunset, he looked even more handsome, and Felicity felt her heart beat a little faster. "Miss Carson, I hope you do not think me too forward, but I wonder if I might call on you sometime. Properly, I mean. If you would be amenable to it." The question took her by surprise, and for a moment she did not know how to answer. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but another part, the part that still hurt from Theodore's betrayal, wanted to run. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Jennings," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention. My last experience with courtship was not exactly successful." "I heard about that," Dalton said quietly, "and I'm sorry for what you went through, but I want you to know that I am not that man. I do not make promises I cannot keep, and I do not say things I do not mean." There was such sincerity in his voice, such honest directness, that Felicity felt something inside her soften. This was what honesty looked like, she realized. Not Theodore's flowery speeches and grand gestures, but this simple, straightforward declaration. "I believe you," she said softly, "but I still need time." "Then take all the time you need," Dalton replied. "I'm a patient man, Miss Carson, and I think you are worth waiting for." The words wrapped around her heart, warm and unexpected, and she found herself smiling despite her reservations. "Thank you." He helped her into the buggy, his hand steady on her arm, and stepped back as she took up the reins. "Travel safely," he said, "and come back to visit Sarah any time. You are always welcome here." As she drove away, Felicity looked back once and saw him still standing there, watching her go. And for the first time since receiving that devastating letter, she felt something that might have been hope. The weeks that followed brought an unexpected pattern to Felicity's life. She found herself visiting Sarah at the ranch more often, and each time Dalton seemed to be nearby. He never pushed, never demanded her attention, but he was always there, offering a smile or a conversation or a helping hand. He would walk with her around the ranch, showing her the new calves or the horses he was training, talking about the land and the work in a way that revealed his deep love for this life. And slowly, carefully, Felicity began to trust him. She learned that he had grown up on a small farm in Kansas, that his parents had died when he was 19, leaving him and his younger sister alone. He had worked various ranches across Kansas and Colorado, sending money back to support his sister, until she married a good man who could provide for her. He had been foreman at the RRR for 5 years now, and he loved the work, loved the responsibility and the challenge of it. "What I appreciate most," he told her one afternoon as they sat on the porch of the main house, "is that everyone here knows exactly where they stand. The rules are clear, the expectations are fair, and if you work hard, you are rewarded. There is no deception, no hidden agendas. Just honest work for honest pay." "That must be refreshing," Felicity said, thinking of all the lies that had consumed her life. "It is," Dalton agreed. He looked at her, his expression serious. "I've always believed that honesty is the foundation of everything. Friendship, business, love. Without it, nothing else matters." "Love," Felicity repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "Yes," Dalton said softly, "especially love. How can you truly love someone if you cannot be honest with them? And how can you accept their love if you are hiding who you really are?" The words struck something deep inside her. Theodore had never been honest, which meant he had never truly loved her. And she, blinded by her own loneliness and desperation, had never truly loved him either. She had loved the idea of him, the dream he represented, but not the man himself, because she had never known the man himself. "I was such a fool," she whispered. "No," Dalton said firmly. He reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and solid. You were trusting, and there is no shame in that. The shame belongs to him, not to you." Felicity looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled around hers with such gentle strength. She had been so afraid to feel anything for anyone again, but Dalton made it easy. He made it safe. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked. "Because you deserve kindness," he replied simply. "And because I care about you, Felicity. I have cared about you since the moment I first saw you in that general store, looking lost and hurt but still standing tall. You have a strength in you that most people do not see, but I see it. And I think you are remarkable." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. No pretty poetry, no grand declarations, just the truth spoken plainly. And somehow, it meant more than all of Theodore's flowery speeches combined. "I care about you too," Felicity heard herself say. "It frightens me, but I do." "It does not have to frighten you," Dalton said. "I promise you, I will never lie to you. Even if the truth is hard, even if it is not what you want to hear, I will always be honest with you. That is my word, and my word is all I have." Felicity believed him, and in that moment, sitting on the porch in the warm May sunshine, she felt the last of her defenses begin to crumble. Their courtship, if it could be called that, was nothing like what Felicity had experienced with Theodore. There were no expensive gifts or extravagant gestures. Instead, Dalton brought her simple wildflowers he picked on the prairie. He taught her to ride a horse properly, spending patient hours in the corral while she learned to trust the animal beneath her. He shared his lunch with her on days when she visited the ranch, simple fare of bread and cheese and apples, eaten while sitting on fence rails and watching the cattle graze. And he talked to her. Really talked, sharing his thoughts and dreams and fears with an openness that still surprised her. He told her about the ranch he hoped to own someday, about the house he wanted to build with his own hands, about the family he dreamed of raising. And he listened when she talked, really listened, his full attention on her as though her words were the most important thing in the world. "What do you want, Felicity?" he asked her one evening as they walked along the creek that ran through the ranch property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and the air was filled with the sound of crickets and the gentle burble of water over stones. "What do you mean?" she asked. "For your life," he clarified. "What do you want? Not what you think you should want or what someone else told you to want. What does your heart desire?" Felicity had to think about that. She had spent so many years wanting what Theodore told her to want that she was not sure she knew anymore. "I want a home," she said slowly. "A real home with people in it who love each other truly. I want honesty. I want to wake up in the morning and not wonder if the person beside me is lying to me. I want to matter to someone, really matter, not just be convenient or useful." She paused, surprised by her own honesty. "And I want children, someday, a family of my own." "Those are good wants," Dalton said. He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Felicity, I cannot promise you a fancy house or an easy life. Ranching is hard work, and there will be difficult times, but I can promise you honesty, always, and I can promise you that you matter to me more than anyone else ever has. And if you will have me, I would be honored to build that home with you, to raise that family with you." Felicity's breath caught. "Dalton, are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me," he said simply. "Not someday. Not in some distant future after I prove myself or make some grand gesture. I'm asking you now because I know my heart, and I know it belongs to you. I love you, Felicity Carson, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you what real love looks like." Tears sprang to Felicity's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy, of finally being seen and valued for who she really was. "I love you too," she whispered. "And yes, Dalton Jennings, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and when he kissed her, it was with a tenderness that made her heart ache in the best possible way. This was what she had been searching for all along, this feeling of being cherished, of being safe, of being home. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Pueblo, with Sarah and Mrs. Henderson and all the ranch hands in attendance. Mr. Richardson, the owner of the Triple R, gave Felicity away. and the preacher smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate wedding Felicity had once imagined with Theodore, but it was perfect in its simplicity, in its honesty. Dalton had been true to his word about everything. He did not have much money, but he had saved enough to add a room onto the foreman's house at the ranch, creating a private space for them to begin their married life. It was small but comfortable, with windows that looked out over the prairie and a fireplace that kept them warm on cool evenings. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Dalton taking his time to make sure Felicity felt safe and cherished. He was patient with her nervousness, honest about his own, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. In the days and weeks that followed, Felicity discovered the profound peace that came from living with complete honesty. Dalton never hid anything from her. He told her when the ranch was struggling financially, when he was worried about a sick cow or a difficult negotiation with buyers. He told her when he was tired or frustrated or uncertain, and he encouraged her to do the same, to share her feelings and fears without worrying about his reaction. "We are partners," he told her one night as they lay in bed, her head resting on his chest. "That means we face everything together, good and bad. I do not want you to hide things from me, and I will not hide things from you. That is the promise we made." It was so different from a life with Theodore, where every conversation had been carefully managed, every emotion filtered through layers of pretense. With Dalton, Felicity could simply be herself, and it was liberating in ways she had never imagined. Summer gave way to fall, and fall to winter. Felicity threw herself into life at the ranch, learning to cook for large groups of men, helping with the bookkeeping, even learning to tend to sick animals when necessary. The work was hard, but it was satisfying, and she loved being part of something larger than herself. Dalton continued to show her, day after day, what real honesty looked like. When she asked him if he ever regretted marrying her so quickly, he looked her straight in the eye and said, "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God for you every day." When she worried that she was not pretty enough or accomplished enough, he told her plainly that he thought she was beautiful and capable, and that her worth was not determined by anyone else's opinion. When they argued, which they occasionally did, he never walked away or gave her the silent treatment. Instead, he talked through the problem with her until they found a solution they could both live with. It was in late December, as they prepared for their first Christmas together, that Felicity realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had wanted to be sure before saying anything. When she finally told Dalton, his face lit up with such pure joy that she could not help but laugh. "A baby," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said. He pulled back to look at her, his hands cupping her face. "You have given me everything I ever dreamed of, Felicity. A home, a partner, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Felicity suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, the summer heat made her uncomfortable and tired. But Dalton was there through all of it, never complaining when she needed him to fetch something or rub her aching back. He talked to her belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the horses and all the adventures they would have together. "What if I am not a good mother?" Felicity asked one night, her voice small with worry. "You will be an excellent mother," Dalton said with absolute certainty. "You are kind and patient and strong. Our child will be lucky to have you." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you," he said simply. "I've watched you care for everyone around you, giving of yourself without expecting anything in return. You have a good heart, Felicity. Trust it." Their son was born on a hot August day in 1883, after 14 hours of labor. Dalton stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths, offering words of encouragement even when she was too exhausted to respond. And when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Dalton wept openly. "He is beautiful," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "He looks just like you." They named him James, after Dalton's father, and he became the center of their world. Dalton was a devoted father, taking James with him around the ranch as soon as the baby was old enough, teaching him about the animals and the land with endless patience. And Felicity discovered that she loved being a mother, loved the weight of her son in her arms, loved watching him grow and change day by day. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dalton continued to work hard at the ranch, and his dedication did not go unnoticed. In the spring of 1885, Mr. Richardson called them both into his office with a proposition. "I am getting old," the rancher said bluntly, "and I do not have any children to leave this place to. I have been thinking about the future, about what happens to the R after I am gone, and I have decided I want to sell it, but not to just anyone. I want to sell it to someone who will care for it the way I have, who will treat the land and the men with respect." He looked at Dalton. "I want to sell it to you." Dalton stared at him in shock. "Sir, I do not have that kind of money." "I know," Mr. Richardson said, "but I am not asking for payment all at once. We can work out terms, a fair price paid over time. I have talked to the bank and they are willing to work with you, given your reputation. What do you say?" Dalton looked at Felicity, his eyes wide with disbelief and hope. "What do you think?" "I think this is your dream," Felicity said softly, "and I think you have earned it." And so, Dalton Jennings became the owner of the R Ranch. It was a huge responsibility, and there were many sleepless nights in those first few months as they figured out how to manage the financial burden. But they faced it together, just as they faced everything, with honesty and determination. The ranch prospered under Dalton's ownership. He was fair with his men, paying them decent wages and treating them with respect, and in return, they worked hard and stayed loyal. He made smart decisions about breeding stock and land management, and slowly, steadily, the ranch grew. Felicity found her own role in the operation, managing the household accounts and eventually taking over the ranch's bookkeeping entirely. She discovered she had a head for numbers and a talent for organization, and Dalton relied on her judgment as much as he relied on his own. "We make a good team," he told her one night as they reviewed the accounts together, James sleeping peacefully in his crib nearby. "We do," Felicity agreed, and it was true. They were partners in every sense of the word, working together, supporting each other, building a life that was both challenging and deeply satisfying. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in the fall of 1886. She had Dalton's blue eyes and Felicity's auburn hair, and she was as spirited as her brother was calm. Dalton doted on her shamelessly, carrying her around the ranch and letting her ride on his shoulders while he worked. "You are spoiling her," Felicity teased one afternoon, watching as Dalton played with Rose on the porch. "She deserves to be spoiled," Dalton replied, tossing the giggling toddler into the air and catching her safely. "She is my little princess." "She's going to have you wrapped around her finger," Felicity predicted. "She already does," Dalton admitted with a grin. As the years passed, Felicity sometimes thought back to that devastating day when she received Mrs. Whitmore's letter. It had felt like the end of the world at the time, like her life was ruined beyond repair. But now, watching her children play in the yard while her husband checked the fence line in the distance, she understood that it had actually been a beginning. Theodore's betrayal had hurt, yes, but it had also freed her. It had forced her to examine what she really wanted, to recognize the difference between pretty lies and uncomfortable truths. And it had brought her to Dalton. She had learned so much from him about what real honesty looked like. It was not always easy or comfortable. There were times when the truth was hard to hear, when facing reality required courage and strength. But it was also liberating, because when you lived honestly, you did not have to worry about maintaining a facade or keeping your stories straight. You could simply be yourself, flaws and all, and trust that you were loved anyway. Dalton had shown her that love without honesty was not really love at all, just a pretty illusion that would eventually crumble. But love built on truth, on seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway, that was the kind of love that lasted. That was the kind of love they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, through honest conversations and shared struggles, and a commitment to always tell each other the truth, even when it was difficult. One evening in the late summer of 1888, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Dalton turned to her with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something," he said. Felicity felt a flutter of concern. "What is it?" "Mr. Garrett approached me today. He wants to buy the northern section of our land, the part that borders his property. He's offering a very good price, more than the land is probably worth." "Do you want to sell?" Felicity asked. Dalton shook his head. "No, that land has some of the best grazing, and I think it will be even more valuable in the future. But I wanted to tell you about the offer, because it is a significant amount of money, and this decision affects both of us. We could pay off a large portion of what we still owe on the ranch." This was what honesty looked like, Felicity thought. Dalton could have simply refused the offer without mentioning it to her. But instead, he shared it, giving her all the information and trusting her to help make the decision. "I think you are right to keep it," she said. "We are doing well, and the debt is manageable. There's no need to sell off part of our future for short-term gain." "That's what I thought too," Dalton said, relief evident in his voice. "I just wanted to make sure we were in agreement." "We are," Felicity assured him. She leaned against his shoulder, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. "Thank you for telling me." "Always," he promised. Their third child, another son they named William, was born in the spring of 1889. He was a quiet baby, thoughtful even as an infant, and he seemed to take after Felicity in temperament. With 3 children now, the house felt full of life and noise and love. Dalton proved to be an exceptional father. He never played favorites, giving each child individual attention and adapting his parenting to their unique personalities. He taught James about responsibility and leadership, encouraged Rose's adventurous spirit while keeping her safe, and nurtured William's gentle, observant nature. And through it all, he modeled the same honesty that defined his relationship with Felicity. "Tell the truth, even when it is hard," he would tell the children. "Your word is the most valuable thing you own. If you say you will do something, do it. If you make a mistake, own up to it. People will not always like what you have to say, but they will respect you for saying it." Felicity watched her children absorb these lessons, saw them learning to value honesty and integrity above convenience or popularity. They were growing up in a home where truth was paramount, where mistakes were acknowledged and forgiven, where love was expressed openly and without pretense. It was everything she had wanted for them. The ranch continued to thrive. By 1891, they had paid off more than half of what they owed, and Dalton was able to expand their herd significantly. They hired more hands, built a new barn, and even added onto the house, creating more space for their growing family. But success brought new challenges. Some of the neighboring ranchers, jealous of Dalton's prosperity, started spreading rumors. They claimed he was cutting corners, mistreating his animals, cheating his men. None of it was true, but rumors had a way of taking root, especially when people wanted to believe them. Dalton was furious when he first heard what was being said. "I have worked so hard to build this reputation," he told Felicity. "I have been honest and fair with everyone. How can they say these things?" "Because they are jealous," Felicity said calmly, "and because it is easier to tear someone down than to build themselves up." "But what do I do?" Dalton asked. "How do I fight lies?" "With truth," Felicity said. "You keep being who you are. You keep treating people well, working hard, standing by your word. Eventually, people will see through the lies." Dalton took her advice. Instead of engaging with the rumors or fighting back with accusations of his own, he simply continued to operate with the same integrity he always had. He invited people to tour the ranch, to see for themselves how the animals were treated and how the men were paid. He was transparent about his business practices, opening his books to anyone who wanted to look. And slowly, the rumors died down. People saw that there was no substance to the accusations, that Dalton Jennings was exactly who he appeared to be, an honest, hard-working man who treated everyone fairly. If anything, the experience actually strengthened his reputation, because it showed that his integrity could withstand scrutiny. "You were right," Dalton told Felicity one night. "Truth really is the best defense against lies." "I learned that from you," Felicity reminded him with a smile. In the fall of 1892, a letter arrived that brought Felicity's past rushing back. It was from Mrs. Whitmore, the woman who had exposed Theodore's deception all those years ago. She wrote to inform Felicity that Theodore had died, struck by a carriage in St. Louis while drunk. Mrs. Whitmore also shared that she had left him 2 years prior, taking her children and starting a new life. She wanted Felicity to know that she understood what it was like to be deceived by Theodore, and she hoped that Felicity had found happiness despite what he had done. Felicity read the letter twice, trying to sort through her feelings. Mostly she felt sadness for Mrs. Whitmore and her children, and relief that Theodore could not hurt anyone else. But she also felt a deep gratitude that she had discovered his lies when she did, before she had married him, before she had wasted any more of her life on a man who did not deserve her trust. She showed the letter to Dalton that evening, and he read it carefully before folding it and handing it back. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Sad," Felicity said honestly, "but mostly grateful. If Mrs. Whitmore had not written to me, if I had married Theodore, I never would have met you. I never would have had this life, this family. Everything I have now exists because I learned the truth about him." "I am grateful too," Dalton said. "Not for what he put you through, but for the fact that you were free when I met you, that you gave me a chance despite what had happened." "You made it easy," Felicity said. "You showed me what I had been missing all along." "What was that?" Dalton asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew. "Honesty," Felicity said simply. "Real, genuine honesty. The kind that builds trust instead of destroying it. The kind that makes love deeper instead of eroding it. You showed me that I deserved better than pretty lies, that I deserved someone who would tell me the truth, even when it was uncomfortable." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You showed me what real love looks like." Dalton pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "And you showed me what it means to be truly seen and valued. We saved each other, Felicity. We built something real together." As the years continued to pass, that foundation of honesty only grew stronger. They faced droughts and difficult winters, financial pressures and family illnesses, all the challenges that came with building a life together. But they faced everything as partners, always honest with each other about their fears and hopes and struggles. Their children grew. James became a capable young man, learning the ranch business and preparing to one day take over from his father. Rose remained spirited and independent, with dreams of becoming a teacher. William, quiet and thoughtful, showed an interest in veterinary medicine, wanting to help animals the way he had seen his father do. Dalton and Felicity supported each child's dreams, just as they supported each other. They taught their children that honesty was not just about telling the truth, but about living authentically, about being true to yourself and others, even when it was difficult. In the summer of 1895, on their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton surprised Felicity with a picnic by the creek where he had first proposed. They left the children with Sarah for the afternoon and rode out to the spot, now made even more beautiful by a decade of memories. 10 years, Dalton said as they sat on a blanket, watching the water flow past. "It has gone by so fast. And yet it feels like I have known you forever," Felicity mused. "Like my life before you was just a dream or maybe a nightmare." "Do you ever think about him?" Dalton asked. "About Theodore?" "Sometimes," Felicity admitted, "but not with any real emotion. He feels like a character from a story I once read, not someone who was actually part of my life. What we have, Dalton, it is so much more real, so much deeper. I understand now what I was missing back then." "What was that?" "The foundation," Felicity said. "Theodore built a relationship on lies, and no matter how pretty those lies were, they were never going to hold. But you and I, we built everything on truth. It was harder work, and it was not always comfortable, but it created something solid, something that can weather any storm." "I love you," Dalton said, pulling her close. "I have loved you from the moment I first saw you, and I will love you until the day I die. That is the truth, and it always will be." "I love you too," Felicity whispered. "Thank you for showing me what real honesty looks like. Thank you for being the man you are." They stayed by the creek until sunset, talking and laughing and simply enjoying each other's company. And as they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Felicity felt a profound contentment. Her life had not turned out the way she once imagined. It had turned out better. The years rolled on, bringing new joys and new challenges. In 1897, James married a sweet girl named Emma from town, and they moved into a house Dalton built for them on the ranch property. Rose went off to teacher's college in Denver, writing long letters home about her studies and her adventures. William apprenticed with the veterinarian in Pueblo, learning his trade while still helping on the ranch when needed. Dalton and Felicity became grandparents in 1898 when James and Emma welcomed a daughter. Holding that tiny baby in her arms, Felicity was overwhelmed with emotion. She had come so far from that devastated woman who had opened Mrs. Whitmore's letter 16 years ago. She had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined, and it was all because she had found a man who valued truth above all else. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked, watching her cradle their granddaughter. "I'm thinking about how blessed I am," Felicity said. "About how different my life could have been if I had never learned the truth about Theodore. If I had married him, I would have been living a lie. I never would have had this, any of this." "But you did learn the truth," Dalton reminded her, "and you had the courage to walk away from the lies and wait for something real. That took strength, Felicity." "You gave me that strength," she said. "You showed me what was possible when two people commit to complete honesty with each other. You taught me that I did not have to settle for pretty words and empty promises, that I deserved substance and truth." Dalton sat beside her, looking down at their granddaughter. "I only told you the truth because that is the only thing worth telling. Lies might be easier in the moment, but they destroy everything in the end. Truth might be harder, but it builds something that lasts." It was a philosophy that had guided their marriage for 16 years, and it had never failed them. Even in their hardest moments when they disagreed or struggled or hurt each other's feelings, they had always come back to honesty. They talked through their problems instead of hiding from them. They acknowledged their mistakes instead of making excuses. They said what they meant and meant what they said. And because of that commitment to truth, their love had deepened and strengthened year after year. They knew each other completely, flaws and all, and they loved each other anyway. There were no secrets between them, no hidden resentments or unspoken expectations, just two people who had chosen each other and chosen honesty, day after day, year after year. By 1900, the Triple R Ranch was one of the most successful operations in southern Colorado. Dalton's reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock had spread far beyond Pueblo, and he regularly received offers to buy cattle from ranchers as far away as Wyoming and New Mexico. The debt from purchasing the ranch had been paid off years ago, and they were now financially secure enough to help their children pursue their dreams. But despite their success, Dalton and Felicity never forgot where they came from. They continued to treat their ranch hands with respect, paying fair wages and providing good conditions. They were active in their community, contributing to the church and helping neighbors in need, and they never lost sight of the values that had brought them together. One afternoon, in late September, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over their land, Felicity reflected on everything they had built together. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked. "In the general store," Dalton said with a smile. "You had that look in your eyes, like you were carrying the weight of the world, but refusing to let it crush you. I thought you were the bravest woman I had ever seen." "I was terrified," Felicity confessed. "I felt like everyone in town was judging me, pitying me. And then you looked at me like I was just a person, not a scandal or a victim. It meant more than you know." "You were never a victim," Dalton said firmly. "You were a survivor. You took a terrible situation and refused to let it define you. That is not weakness, Felicity. That is courage." Felicity smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I could not have done it without you." "You would have," Dalton insisted, "but I am glad you did not have to. I am glad I got to be part of your journey." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family, James and Emma's voices as they prepared dinner, the laughter of their grandchildren playing. It was everything Felicity had ever wanted, everything she had once thought was lost to her forever. "I love our life," she said softly. "So do I," Dalton replied. "Every single day I wake up grateful. Grateful for you, for our family, for this land, for the opportunity to live honestly and love deeply. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "You know what I realized?" Felicity said. "Theodore's lies were not just about deceiving me. They were about him being too cowardly to live authentically. He hid behind false identities because he did not have the courage to be himself. But you, Dalton, you have always had that courage. You have never pretended to be anything other than what you are, and that is why I trust you completely. Trust is earned, Dalton said, and it is maintained through consistent honesty. I never want you to doubt me, Felicity. I never want you to wonder if I am telling you the truth. So I will keep being honest with you, even when it is hard, even when the truth is not what either of us wants to hear. Because that is the only way to maintain the trust we have built. It was this unwavering commitment to truth that had made their marriage so strong. Other couples they knew struggled with resentment and misunderstandings, with unspoken expectations and hidden grievances. But Dalton and Felicity faced everything head-on, talking through problems as they arose, never letting issues fester beneath the surface. As they moved into the new century, their life continued to unfold with a steady, satisfying rhythm. More grandchildren arrived, the ranch continued to prosper, and their children built successful lives of their own. Rose returned from college and opened a school in Pueblo, teaching children with the same passion and dedication she brought to everything. William established a veterinary practice that served ranchers throughout the region. And James proved to be a capable successor, learning everything he could from his father and preparing to eventually take over the ranch. Through it all, Dalton and Felicity remained each other's anchor. They had weathered storms together, celebrated victories together, and grown old together. And every single day, Dalton showed Felicity what real honesty looked like, not through grand gestures or flowery speeches, but through the small, consistent acts of truth-telling that built a life of integrity. When challenges arose, as they inevitably did, Dalton never sugarcoated the situation. He told Felicity exactly what they were facing, whether it was a financial setback or a problem with the herd or a conflict with a neighbor. And together, they would figure out a solution, their partnership strengthened by the knowledge that they could rely on each other completely. When happy moments came, Dalton expressed his joy openly, never hiding his emotions or playing it cool. He told Felicity how much she meant to him, how beautiful she still was to him, how grateful he was for every day they had together. And she did the same, expressing her love freely, without reservation or pretense. It was not always easy. There were times when honesty meant having difficult conversations, when truth revealed uncomfortable realities. But even in those moments, they never regretted their commitment to transparency. Because they both understood that the alternative, a relationship built on lies and omissions, was far worse than any temporary discomfort that came from facing the truth. In the spring of 1905, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Felicity's hand and looked into her eyes with the same intensity he had shown the day they met. 20 years, he said. 20 years of waking up beside you, of building this life with you, of loving you more with each passing day. You are my partner, my best friend, my truest companion. And I want you to know that every promise I made to you the day I proposed, I have kept. I have been honest with you, always. I have loved you completely, and I have tried every single day to be worthy of the trust you placed in me. You have more than kept your promises, Felicity said, tears glistening in her eyes. You have shown me what it means to live with integrity. You have taught our children, by example, what real love looks like. You have built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of honesty and honor that will continue long after we are gone. We built it together, Dalton corrected gently. Every step of the way, we have been partners. Your strength, your wisdom, your unwavering support, that is what made all of this possible. They held each other close. Two people who had chosen truth over convenience, substance over style, real love over pretty lies. And in that moment, Felicity understood with perfect clarity that this was what happiness looked like. Not the fantasy she had once imagined with Theodore, all surface beauty and hollow promises, but this deep, abiding contentment that came from truly knowing and being known, from loving and being loved without pretense or deception. The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable challenges of aging. Dalton's hands grew stiff with arthritis, making some tasks more difficult. Felicity's eyesight weakened, requiring spectacles for reading, but they faced these changes together, adapting and supporting each other, their bond only growing stronger with time. By 1910, James had taken over most of the day-to-day operation of the ranch, though Dalton still offered guidance and wisdom. They had more time now for quiet moments together, for long walks around the property they had built, for evenings spent on the porch watching their grandchildren play. "Do you have any regrets?" Felicity asked one evening. Dalton thought about it seriously, as he always did when she asked him a question. "No," he said finally. "Not about anything that matters. I made mistakes, certainly. There were times I could have been more patient, more understanding. But I have no regrets about the life we built together, about the choices we made, about the values we upheld. We did it right, Felicity. We built something real and lasting, and I am proud of that." "So am I," Felicity agreed. She looked out over their land, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red. "When I think back to that day I received Mrs. Whitmore's letter, when I thought my life was over, I never could have imagined this. I never could have dreamed that such pain would lead to such joy." "Sometimes we have to walk through darkness to reach the light," Dalton said, "but you were brave enough to keep walking, even when you could not see where you were going. That is what brought you to me." "No," Felicity corrected gently. "That is what brought us to each other. Because you were brave enough to see me, really see me, past the scandal and the hurt to the person I truly was. You took a chance on me when I could not even take a chance on myself." "Best decision I ever made," Dalton said with a smile. They sat together until the stars came out, holding hands and sharing the comfortable silence that only came from decades of partnership. And Felicity thought, not for the first time, how grateful she was for Theodore's betrayal. Because without it, without that painful lesson in what dishonesty looked like, she might never have recognized the precious gift of Dalton's honesty. She might never have understood how rare and valuable it was to find someone who told the truth, always, even when it was difficult. Theodore had shown her what love was not, had taught her to recognize the warning signs of deception and manipulation, and that knowledge had prepared her to recognize real love when she finally found it. She had learned to value substance over style, honesty over flattery, consistency over grand gestures, and because of that, she had built a life that was truly satisfying, truly meaningful, truly her own. As they moved into their later years, Dalton and Felicity became the foundation of their extended family. Their children came to them for advice, their grandchildren for wisdom and stories. And through it all, they continued to model what real partnership looked like, what real love looked like, what real honesty looked like. "Tell me again how you knew," their granddaughter asked one day. "How did you know Grandpa was different from your first fiancé?" Felicity smiled, remembering. "He was honest," she said simply. "Not just about the big things, but about everything. He did not try to impress me with things that were not true. He did not make promises he could not keep. He showed me exactly who he was, flaws and all, and trusted me to accept him, and I did the same with him. We built our relationship on truth, and that made all the difference." "It sounds simple," her granddaughter said. It is simple," Felicity agreed, "but it is not easy. Honesty requires courage. It requires being vulnerable, admitting when you are wrong, facing uncomfortable truths. But it is the only way to build something that lasts. Your grandfather taught me that, and it is the most valuable lesson I ever learned." In the fall of 1915, as the aspens turned gold and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter, Dalton and Felicity celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their entire family gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted well into the night, filled with laughter and music and stories. And as Felicity looked around at all the people they had created and nurtured, at the legacy of love and honesty they had built together, she felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Dalton found her standing on the porch, looking out over the land they had worked so hard to build. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about that young woman who opened a letter 25 years ago and thought her life was over," Felicity said. "I wish I could go back and tell her that everything was going to be all right, that the pain she was feeling was going to lead her to something better than she ever imagined, that she was going to meet a man who would show her what real love looks like, what real honesty looks like, that she was going to build a life beyond her wildest dreams." "She would not have believed you," Dalton said with a gentle laugh. "No," Felicity agreed, "she would not have. She had to live it to believe it. She had to meet you and learn, day by day, year by year, what it meant to be truly seen and truly loved. She had to experience honesty to understand its value. "We were lucky to find each other," Dalton said. "We were," Felicity agreed. She turned in his arms to face him, looking up at the man who had been her partner for 3 decades. His hair was silver now, his face lined with age, but his blue eyes were as clear and honest as they had been the day they met. "Thank you for never lying to me. Thank you for always telling me the truth, even when it was hard. Thank you for showing me what real honesty looks like." "Thank you for trusting me with your heart," Dalton replied. "Thank you for giving me a chance when you had every reason to protect yourself. Thank you for building this life with me." "I love you, Felicity Jennings. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you until my last breath. That is the truth, and it always will be." They stood together on the porch, surrounded by the sound of their family celebrating inside, looking out over the land they had built together. And Felicity knew with absolute certainty that this was what happily ever after looked like. Not a fairy tale ending with no problems or challenges, but a real life built on truth and trust and unwavering commitment. A life where honesty was the foundation of everything, where love grew deeper with each passing year, where 2 people faced the world as true partners. She had been deceived by her fiancé for so long, believing his pretty lies and empty promises. But then a cowboy had shown her what real honesty looked like, and that honesty had changed everything. It had given her a life of integrity, a marriage of true partnership, a love that was real and lasting and profound. As the sun set over the Triple R Ranch, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Felicity Jennings stood in the arms of her husband and knew that she had found something rare and precious. She had found a man whose word could be trusted, whose love was genuine, whose honesty was absolute. And that honesty had been the foundation of everything good in her life, the bedrock upon which they had built their beautiful, lasting love story.